So the problem is, if you look at this lens, it has a lip all the way around that will prevent you mounting it on one of the newer SLRs or DSLRs that use this little tab here to meter the light, to tell the camera what aperture it's at. Now this is a newer f2. I wouldn't be able to, or it could very well damage this tab, which is plastic. It's a tab on a ring that goes all around the opening. So if I were to try to put this here, if you can see, the lens here would hit that tab. Once it hits that tab, either you can't mount it on. If you force it, you will damage it. You don't want to do that. So what I need to do is grind off a portion of this ring, this aperture ring, so it works on this camera also, and I can take advantage of using that lens on the newer bodies. Here's one that I did. This is the 85mm 1.8, which is a fabulous lens, and it was just sitting around because I don't have any more old cameras like the old Nikkor mats that use this prong. Little, they call them rabbit ears. So what I did here, if you could see, I cut out a section. I ground down this section. So by grinding down that section in the right part, in this case would be just before the f11, you can mount it on here because you made the cutout for the tab. Then when you put it on here, you can see where it contacts the tab. Now you have automatic meter reading. So when I come back, we'll start on this and I'll show you how I did the work. Alright, the first thing we need to do is to remove these rear screws. Now this could be the hardest part of the whole project because these little screws back here are held in with thread lock, and it could be quite a chore to take them off. Sometimes you have to take a Q-tip soaked in alcohol or soaked in acetone and you dab it around the opening as much as you can to try to break that bond. In this case, I was able to do it without having to add any alcohol or acetone to it. You need a good screwdriver. You don't want to get a screwdriver that's much smaller than the hole, much smaller than the slot, because you're just going to mess up the screw that way. So you want to get a screwdriver. In this case, I use a Wera with a 3mm flathead that covers almost the entire screw opening. So I already broke the thread lock on these, so I'm going to go ahead and remove them now. I'm going to start with I'm going to start removing first. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to start removing this one, this one, this one, and this one. I'm going to leave this one because sometimes that one holds a spring for the aperture. So I'm not sure if this is that type, so I'm going to leave it in place just in case. If I can't pull out the lens mount, then that means it's going to have to come off. So this isn't coming off, so that's telling me that I have to remove this screw also. So one thing that I make sure, just in case, I'll see what aperture I left it on. I'm going to leave it at Oh, I'll put it at f2, because when you're going to reassemble it, this screw goes through a little slot that has to be at f2 if you remove it at f2, or else it'll make your job a little bit harder. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this screw here. Hopefully it won't be an issue. So we take this screw off. Well, first of all, let me pull off the lens mount. This comes off. Here you have the two tabs that fit around a tab that's in the lens. This is what makes the aperture work. You can see the little tab right there, down in here, right there. Fits around that, and you're able to get the aperture. Okay, so this lens ring comes off. That's fine. You don't need to use that till you reassemble. As far as the screws, put them in a safe place. Then we'll finish taking this little screw off here. Put that there. Then you're ready to remove the aperture ring. Slides right off. Once you slide it off, you can see the little notches for the clicks and the little spring for the clicks. So you're done with this. Take your lens, put it aside where it's not going to get any dust or it's not going to get damaged. Alright, here's the ring. I started working on it a little bit already, as you can see here. But what I want to point out is where you need to start the actual grinding, or material removal from here. From what I've seen online and other lenses that are f2, it starts a little bit before the f11 here. So I'm doing basically 2 ridges before the number 1 on f11, which seems to coincide with what the f2 lenses that I've seen, where this notch begins, and also on this same lens being AI modified with the actual AI kit from Nikon. They all begin around there. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm leaving this little rabbit ears on because I'm going to grind those down also. Hold on one moment, please. Sorry about that. So I want to grind this down just in case you want to use it also with the old cameras like the Nikon F or the Nikon Nikkor mats, or any of the old cameras that use the little prong for metering. So basically what I did to start the actual mark where you're going to start grinding, I used the real thin, and it's kind of triangular shaped, but it has 3 sharp edges that are great for starting the actual grinding, because with a big file that'll be literally impossible. Once you start the corners, the very ends, which here, like I said, which is critical, is this particular mark, because that's the one that's gonna hook up to the metering tab on the camera. So basically you start off with a corner, you grind it down, you grind the other side down. Once you're down sufficiently, maybe 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter or so, then you just start grinding the actual ring. This is the longest part of the process, but this is basically it. Okay, when you bring the file to the edge here, the file is nice and flat, so it will give this a nice flat image. If by any chance you need to go further on either side, it's real easy, because you just grind while you push the file this way to bring that cut further, bring that lip further, but you don't want to go over. So I just grind away both sides. You just keep at it. It takes about 20 minutes or so. And what you want to do is, I'll give you the exact measurement as we go, but you probably want to bring this down about a millimeter, millimeter and a half. You can kind of use this little lip here as a guide to, you know, for evenness if you don't have a gauge to measure. But you see where it's got a little lip right here? You're going to grind down pretty close to that. So don't be afraid. Another thing that I use, if you don't have a gauge, I'll get the gauge later and show you guys. Another thing that I use for reference as I go is the actual lens mount. If you put the lens mount in there, right, you can see the lip here, the little lip here that's sticking out. You can safely grind down using this lens mount as a guide. You can grind down until the lip here that you're grinding is basically even with the lens mount. So if you were to run your finger by it, it would just feel flat. You want to feel this. So I'm going to go continue, keep grinding this down, and I'll be back to show you pretty much the finished product here. And I'll show you the measurements, where they were before and after. And eventually then we'll get to actual testing the camera and checking the light reading with my D700. So I'll be back in a few as I keep grinding here. So I'll see you shortly. Alright, here is basically the finished, or close to the finished product. As you can see, I took off here considerable amount here, which if it's about, well, let's see, the outer part of the ring is roughly 14 millimeters, maybe 14 and 5/100ths of a millimeter, and I ground down about down to 12.8 roughly. Hold on here. It's a little bit lower in the middle, but 1/100ths of a 1/10 of a millimeter isn't going to matter much. And this is hard to hold even also, this caliper. But it's roughly about 12.8. So bring that down from 14, you're talking about 1.2 or 1.25 millimeters roughly, which should be sufficient. If you take the lens mount and put it on here, you can see where it's literally even. Maybe the grounded part is a tiny bit lower, because some cameras, that little tab for some reason varies on the length. The little tab that sticks out on the camera that's gonna grab onto this to this lip here. So you can see it's literally even. So that's a good way to measure also. Another thing that I like to do with a smaller file is kind of at an angle, just deburr the edges so there's nothing sharp. I'll deburr these little edges here. Same thing from the other side. So at least it feels nice. It doesn't feel like, you know, like a razor blade, because this is pretty sharp. Just these little edges. Go over this a little bit too, to smoothen it out some so it doesn't look so raw and so rough. After that, I'll take a piece of sandpaper. In this case it's 150. Also to smoothen this out so it doesn't look so raw. It doesn't take much, just enough to clean that out, make it feel nicer to the touch, and make it look better also. And then finally I'll go over it with 400 grit. Let me adjust the camera here. With 400 grit paper, just wrap it around a ruler or whatever you can fit in here, and then gotta keep it even. This gives it a nicer machined look. You see it starts to get the rough edges. It feels really smooth. Sometimes I've gone up to 800. That's almost like a polish, which looks nice. Not necessary, but you know, you want your work to look pretty nice too, I would imagine. Especially if the lens is in good condition. So I think this is pretty much what I want it to be. So you can see that little ridge that I had shown you before. See how close we've ground down to it. Here's that little ridge here. There are the screw holes. The screws got a little bit of grinding off, but they'll still work like that, that's for sure. Now I'm pretty happy with this. It's been deburred, it's been sanded down with a little fine paper and whatnot. Now what I'm going to do is wash this really good. You want to get all the metal shavings off of there, and then we're going to lubricate it. Then we're going to assemble it and see how it does on the camera itself. So I'll be back with that. Okay, here's the ring. I cleaned it really well. I got rid of all the metal shavings. And we're going to go ahead and lube it. And then we're going to reassemble the lens. Alright. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and lubricate it a little bit. I just use some regular synthetic lube. I like to use the super lube. It works fine. Does a good job. Okay, one of these I love. Also, what I like is these little kind of Q-tips they use for nails. They come in very handy. Okay. Here's the ridges for the clicks, for the little clicks. We're gonna lube that, and I'm just gonna go pretty much around the whole ring here. Put a little lube on it. You don't want gobs of it, obviously. Okay. Let me adjust the camera a bit. Alright, now I'm going to get the lens. Give that a little dusting. So remember, I believe I left this at f2. So you could see this little hole here. That's where the screw hole that's going to line up with this part of the ring, so it actually turns the shutter blades. So we install this. I like to put the little ridges here, push down on the little ring, and then push it in. So I believe I left it at f2, which sounds about right, because that's going to bring it all the way here. So that should be aligned. Let's see if that's the case. Okay, that looks good. So basically, the only thing you got to do now is take the lens mount and the lens mount. This opening that's here on the lens mount is gonna fit right on each side of this tab down here. This little tab right there. That little tab controls your aperture. So you just basically want to line up this to fit right around that. So let's see here. Okay. Let me move the light here so I can see it better. Forgive me here. Okay. And then you're going to turn the lens mount to little lines with the screws, with the screw holes. That looks pretty good. Let's see. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to put the screws. When you put the screws, I highly recommend a screwdriver that's wide enough to cover pretty much the diameter of the screw slot. So you don't have any issues with stripping the screws, which would be a pain in the butt for you. These screws are pretty much impossible to get unless you have a lens to that you use as a donor. Alright, so this is done here. Tighten down. So now we're going to take this, make sure that this doesn't hit that and push it in or damage it. So we're going to line up the tabs, and also to verify that I ground it out properly. So here we go. See, that's where it grabs it. Let's go all the way. Nice and smooth. You can see the little tab there. Now what I need to do is check that it's reading properly. So let's see if that's the case. So we look at here at the at the aperture here. Let me put it on manual right quick. Now if you look at the aperture here, this is a 35 f2. Now I'm going to put it at 2.8. There you go, beautiful. f4, 5.6, f8, 11, and 16. So this lens is ready to go.